Okay, and so just to start the recording, this is where, if you're going to follow along, Chapter 16, how to authenticate and authorize users, I'm looking at the download for the Murach second edition. In the student download, there's solutions, and I'm looking at this Chapter 13 bookstore completed solution. And so go ahead and, if you boot that up, and should be able to just update database. And then under SQL Explorer, you get a bookstore database. And if you boot that up, this is kind of a starting point, anyways, for this chapter. Okay, and so chapter 16, how to authenticate and authorize. Authentication is providing some credentials that say you belong to our system. Of course, you have to register for an account to belong into the system. And then authorization is saying, hey, you're allowed here, you're not allowed there. And so it's a two-part process, authentication and authorization. And we cover both of those things. Of course, this is your standard login system. .NET, Microsoft has always made it, in my opinion, shockingly easy. It's not, I wouldn't call this shockingly easy, but it's easier than I would have ever anticipated. And so I would say that building this system is easier than I would have anticipated. Just figuring, login systems, we're complex animals, complex beasts. And if we go back to what we did in JavaScript, we completely coded it from scratch. And there's benefits to coding from scratch in that exactly all the details, right? You know what you coded, how it works, the ins and the outs of your code. This is using a lot of built-in classes and a lot of built-in, a built-in library, the identity namespace, to kind of build on top of a pre-loaded framework. They're basically giving us a preloaded kit that works out of the box, and we just have to figure out how to implement it. The benefits of that is that there's going to be a little bit more security built in, right? There's going to be, if everyone's building a login system from scratch, safe to say some are going to be faster than others, some are going to be more secure than others. In this .NET world, it's fast, it's secure, it's because it's Microsoft. It's not perfect. I'm not saying it's perfect, but we're not coding it from scratch. Therefore, we get a pretty good out of the box system. And so when it comes to the first part, which is authenticating users, usernames and passwords, of course you could use Windows-based authentication where the website looks at your credentials on your Windows machines. I don't think anybody would really expect that for the most part. You're just going to be open internet authentication. Along the way, I've used these kinds of credentialed systems, and they're by no means like normal, right? What you're used to is just web authentication. But it does use your local Windows accounts to pass through the authentication from your Windows box to the website. Most appropriate for an intranet app, right? So you guys know the difference. Internet, wide open, completely open to the world. Intranet is internal to your company, and so nowadays you could just use like SharePoint and those kinds of sources, tools, I should say. SharePoint for local intranet sites. And so I have seen some of this Windows authentication on these SharePoint websites. What you would expect is individual user account authentication, username and password from a website. There's built-in encryption, right? So if you have SSL on the site, right, kind of out of the box, you get encryption. You just have to make sure to secure it from the server's point of view, and that's what you would expect. So that's what we're going to be working with is individual user account authentication. Then there are a lot of benefits to using third-party authentication. The biggest benefit to any website to not have to have their own authentication is when you're storing credentials, you're storing username and passwords on your server, right? You're responsible for keeping them secure, right? So just think about, if a company were to quote unquote get hacked and then that information leak, that's on your company. That's a responsibility of your company to keep that secure. So the benefit of not storing your own authentication and letting Google handle it or Facebook handle it is that, that's where the credentials are stored. And so they'd have to hack into Google's databases, if you will, to get access to your information on your account. But point is that the responsibility would fall on someone else. That's not what this book focuses on. This book focuses on the pretty much standard individual user accounts. The thing about these technologies, you just got to work with their APIs and figure out how to make the right calls, the right method calls, and pass the credentials through. So even to use these other systems, you have to learn this stuff anyways, because you have to learn how to, extract the username and password and confirm password, et cetera, before you pass it on to Google servers. So it's a really good idea to learn this, but there is another step first, which is we're going to take that step. Pretty back and forth, like obviously nothing you need to memorize, but if you just want to kind of look at this slide and get the idea of a workflow of how many times communication goes back and forth between client and server, this diagram shows a communication between a client on the left and a server on the right, and how much communication can happen just to ultimately gain access to a page. Starting with an unauthenticated user, the user says, "Hey, give me a page." The server says, "Hey, who are you? Oh, I don't see an authentication cookie, so I don't know who you are. So let me, instead of giving you the page that you want, let me give you a login page. So send back the login page." Then the client has to post their credentials, right? So the client's going to put in username and password and click on submit, sends that back to the server. So already a little bit of back and forth. We're on step number 4. You then get the credentials. Oh, I skipped the redirect. Okay, so the server says, "Hey, you're not at the right site. I need to send you to a login page." The client then says, "Give me the login page." The server responds with the login page. There we go. Now the client puts in their username and password, posts it to the server, and then the server needs to check if it's valid. And if so, creates a cookie that you are authenticated and sends it back to the client. Step 7, the browser receives the redirect and requests the original page. The cookie then contains authentication ticket is sent back to the server. Okay, whole lot of back and forth. I mean, that's the gist of this slide. And so, and the other part of this is it's 2 steps, right? Step 1, authentication. Step 2, authorization. The login system is built into what's called ASP.NET Identity. So just as we got familiar with the entity framework, for databases, we're going to get familiar with ASP.NET Identity for dealing with user logins. And then built into identity, these are all the classes that we use to work with user accounts. This piece here, the DB context, right, we'll be using with this identity DB context so that we can work with both our normal database, entity framework databases, and with identity. So it does both. We have classes to work with users. We have classes to work with roles. A role's just a group, right? So you can group users together, giving them roles. So this represents a user, this represents a role. User manager and role managers, this will have methods to work with users, methods to work with roles, all the methods to sign in, and identity result is going to be like, hey, you successfully logged in, or you failed to log in. And so these are basically the classes that we will be working with as we get familiar with ASP.NET Identity. So what are the benefits of identity? Well, we're working with .NET Core, but there are other .NET frameworks, and so we were looking at one of the newer ones that we, didn't cover in this class, but there's obviously some other frameworks, some newer ones, some older ones. Identity kind of works across the spectrum of all the .NET frameworks. So there's like the old school web forms. There was .NET MVC before it was .NET Core MVC, so on and so forth. When you're working with the database, you can modify the schema of the identity database. And so what does that mean? Well, you can change the rows and the columns, you can change the columns in the database, you can change the tables. I mean, this is basically the plan for the database. So you can modify, there is a default system, but you can modify that database schema, that database plan. Worked with unit testing, third-party authentication providers. Okay, lots of benefits to working with identity. And pretty incredible that when it comes to, okay, once we create these users, we log them in, how do we protect our resources, right? Well, we can put these attributes on our controllers or, to protect the whole controller. And so, like this attribute right here that says authorize, well, if you decorate a controller with authorize, now you have to be logged in to access any of those methods in that controller. So it becomes quite simple using these attributes on a controller to say, okay, well, at least you got to be logged in by marking it with authorize. But more specifically, if you want to be an admin, you would say authorize for the role of admin. And boom, all of a sudden, that's really the only code, needed to protect a resource or protect a web page behind some permissions. And so I thought that was pretty simple to implement. Yeah, right.
So it's just you put it on the list and then it would error out, or how would that work?
Yeah, so it would redirect you. It depends on how you handle it, but it can be handled different ways. But ideally you want to redirect them to a login page, right? And so that kind of goes back to here. It's like the browser wants a requested page, and the server sees you're not in the right permission, so let me redirect you to a login page. So you can see here, just by marking this on the controller itself, you at least have to be logged in to access the cart controller. In this case, you have to be an admin to access the book controller. You can get more granular than that if you want to go down and say, okay, anybody can list. So now we're into the controller and the individual methods. Anybody, anonymous access, can list. You have to be logged in to add, and you have to be admin to delete. Right? So if you want more granular control, you can get it with these attributes. Again, super simple to add those, and so I think that's pretty cool.
So if you were to decorate at the top of the controller, let's say, okay, yeah, if you were to do that at the top, but let's say two of those routes anybody could do, you still have to decorate like that get as authorize as well, even though you did it higher up.
So if you were to, on the controller, put...
Yeah, like whatever doesn't have, let's say, allow anonymous, like by default at that point, does it require the authorize?
Yeah. Right?
So I'm kind of confused with the allow anonymous, because wouldn't that just work no matter what? Like, you kind of get the allow anonymous for free. So I'm kind of confused on, like, do you get anything from adding the allow?
Yeah, you know, the way I would look at it is it would override. So if you decorate the controller with one thing and then you needed to override it with allow anonymous, you could do so. So if on the controller you said authorize, but then on this method you wanted to allow anonymous, it would override the controller. For here, you're saying, hey, if you don't decorate it at all, it's already allowing anonymous, and that is correct. At that point, that's just a little bit more readable code. Okay, and so, you know, we're working with this namespace, this piece of the framework called identity. And one of the first things that you'll do is you'll create a class, and that class will be called user, and user will inherit from identity user, right? So our model, if you will, is just a user class. It's going to inherit from identity user, and then you get all of these passwords for free. Of course, in your class, you can add properties and remove them, but for the most part, to get a basic login system, you don't need to, right? All you really have to do is inherit from identity user, and then that's your class. Your user class is identity user. And so, you know, in the book, we'll go ahead and code this up real quick. This is on page 659. And again, what I'm doing is I'm working from the finished Chapter 13 EX1 bookstore solution. And I'm going to go into models, and I'll just go into domain models. We can always move this if need be. And I'm just going to add a class. And this is my user class. And let's bring in the namespace. Now, right away, if I just inherit from identity user, let's see if it picks up the namespace. It doesn't. Sometimes, let's hover, show potential, and there it is. Using Microsoft ASP.NET Core identity. And it just took a minute. You bring in that using statement at the top. And again, what you get by creating this class, well, you're creating a local model for your users, but you get all of these properties. So just kind of glancing at these properties, this is what you would expect for a user account, right? I mean, a username, a password, a confirmed password, an email account, email confirmed, of course. You want to send that. You want to send that email to their account so that they have to click on the, you know, yes, this is a valid email address to confirm their email. Phone number confirmed. And so we just coded up our user class. And the next step is to bring in the entity framework core with identity. And so if you're going to be working with your own database using entity framework, as we've been doing this entire time, and you're going to, bring in identity, these two things together to play nice, you have to bring in this NuGet package. So Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity Entity Framework. So we know how to do this. We're going to go Tools, Package Manager. Let's click on Browse. Let's see, ASP.NET Core Identity.Entity Framework Core. Let's see. Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Identity Entity Framework Core. That looks good to me. Let me pull up my slide one last time. Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity Entity Framework Core. Make sure we're bringing in the right thing. Looks good. Install. Okay, that's going to get us access to those classes for the identity, DB context, and the user and the manage user, etc. And I'm getting an error here because of some version differences. Package Microsoft Identity Entity Framework Core 7.05 is not compatible with .NET 6.
You can change the version here.
So yeah, let's change the version. Is that just right off of?
No, like if you go back to that page you were just on.
Yeah.
It says version under. Yeah. Right
Yeah. There we go. Good eye. The question is which one do we want? So it looks like .NET 7 supports .NET 7. So let's go to .NET 7. Sure, let's click install there. Still not happy. Let's go down to 6. Obviously, if you're installing from a new template and you're not working off an old project, you're not going to have this error, right? It's just because we're trying to install this on some older code.
That seemed to work.
6 seemed to work. Okay, now let me click on close and save and close. Again, so I'm kind of following along in the book. We created our user class. We installed that NuGet package. The next thing to do is to modify the bookstore context. And so, if I find that bookstore context, it's under data layer. There's bookstore context. And here we inherit from DB context. Let's bring in the using Microsoft ASP.NET Core .identity and using Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity Entity Framework Core. So add in those two using statements. And we're going to change this inherits from to identity DB context. And the user class that we just created should go in there now. User, we might need to add in our full path to my user using bookstore models See if that makes it happy. Nope.
Domain models.
Dot domain models. Now we're happy.
Did you update the database?
Not yet. And down here, we need to add a call to the onModel creating base.onModel creating model builder. Calling the parent class onModel creating. Making that happen. So let's see what error. Updating the base class and our base interface requires restarting the application. So let's shut her down and do a build. Build succeeded. Okay, but Vinny saw where this was going. I was asking if we added a migration and updated the database. So to that point, we had not. So we're going to do that. So let's go to our package manager console, add migration, add identity tables. And you can kind of see what it's creating. We're creating a table called roles, creating a table called users. Of course, lots of columns in our users table. Creating a table called role claims. Lots of tables, ASP, net user logins. So let's go ahead and update database. And that looked good. Let's close that down, close that down, close that down. And if I go back into my databases, you can see we have a lot of new tables here. Users and roles and claims and logins. And this is good stuff. I also that's really pretty simple, right? I mean, we haven't done a whole lot of code to get this whole database schema full of fields for our users. So we obviously haven't created any users yet, so we will do that, but you can kind of see the tables are now in place for us to store database users. Okay, and where we're heading next, as one might guess, is into the program.cs. And so this is where you can configure what's called the middleware. And so we kind of we've dabbled in this file on more than one occasion. And so let's bring in a using statement for identity. And let's see. We need to add a configure services. Okay, I think I've got this right. I just took a little pause here. So right underneath our bookstore context, we're going to builder services. Add identity. User, comma. Of course, to get user recognized, I need it to have the right using. Okay. Okay, now these options are changing the default. So there are some default options that are like 8-character passwords. And another default is that you're only logged in for the session. So of course, it depends on your website needs. Do you want the user to close the browser and come back and they're still logged in? A lot of times you let the user check the box to remember me, and then you can set up the cookie to persist, longer than the session. So you can kind of change these options in here. Option.password, and there's a required length, right? So we'll change it to 6. Require non-alpha numeric, so that you don't have to type in a special character. Whether they need a digit or they don't.
What does required digit do?
Required digit, like the number 5 in the password or something.
Oh, so like a number or something?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Now these are custom options. You don't have to have these options. In fact, you could delete everything inside of here. I'm just going to undo this. I'm just going to show you, but you can delete all of this. And if you just want to accept the defaults, you don't need those options. Okay, but if you want to get in there and get real custom, just as a reminder, the most secure thing that you can do for your passwords isn't adding a digit or isn't requiring a special character, it's the length, right? If you want to make a password more secure, the number one thing you can do is make it longer. And we've hashed through all that before. The next step is just a couple method calls down here. After use routing, I'll just add in app.use authentication, app.use authorization. Now I will point this out. I mean, if you are taking notes, this is a little bit different than the book code, but not terribly different. Because they give a. It is, but you notice that outerlying method, public void configure services, on page 663. Just starts with services add identity, but pretty similar. I mean, 95% similar. Okay, and that's what we need for middleware. And then we're ready to start coding controllers and views and all that fun stuff. I'm going to pause right here. Okay, where we're headed to next is the nav bar. And we're going to add a link if the user is logged in versus a different link if they're not logged in. To kind of just glance at the nav bar before we make any changes, you're going to see kind of a left side of the nav bar and a right side. The right side, this cart was kind of implemented in 13. Register, you can see, is what we're focusing on. Registration is not yet implemented. So that's what we're going to be focusing on, is right here. And so the idea is we're going to add a login button, and we're going to see that button if they're not logged in. But if they are logged in, you see something else, like just their username, welcome Billy, kind of thing. That will come after the, so it'll say register and log in, otherwise it'll just show their username. So, open up inside of views, we got shared layout, and we're going to add in some using statements here. And so you can kind of take a guess that the inject command is putting in a field for the view to use. So we're going to put in a field of type sign in manager. We're signing in a user. And so we're adding these 3 lines of code. And then we're going to go down into our nav bar. Okay, now basically this whole thing is a giant nav bar. Div class container, here comes our nav bar, nav item, nav item, nav item. So here's our first unordered list. You could probably guess that's on the left hand side. Here's our next unordered list. You could take a guess that's on the right hand side. And this is the link that says it's not been implemented yet for the register. Now again, you'll only see register if you're not logged in. So let's start with just gonna comment this out for now, and I'll pull that back in at some point. So again, the class is sign-in manager. That was one of the classes on the slide from before. And we create a field for the sign-in manager and call the isSignedIn method. Of course, this is where we will be logged in. We'll show them an LI. Basically a log out button. If you're logged in, we'll show them basically a logout button and their name.
Can you scroll to the right a little bit? Is there anything after button like? No?
Nothing after that.
I'm missing it. I got it.
Here comes the else block. Meaning they're not logged in. That was interesting. When I typed that, I got a mistake. I don't no quote here. Instead, that quote goes here. Let me double check. Okay, looking good. Okay, a log out button, a login button, and a register button.
Pretty good.
Yeah. Now this nav active is not ringing a bell. Do you guys do? I don't know. That might have been in a chapter we didn't hit.
Yeah, I looked in it's a class that they made that just does the toggling.
Okay.
So if you go to view models, there's the one called nav down at the very bottom of the models.
You could have controlled and clicked on that.
Yeah, there we go. So it's just a kind of some ternary stuff, basically making an whatever's active. Have that lit.
Class for that.
Yeah. Fair enough. Okay. Let's glance at it. See what's broke. And we have a register button that leads to /account/register, and a login button that leads to /account/login. Obviously, we don't have an account controller yet with any of these methods, so they're not going anywhere. But let's make that. Anything else here? Just a if else?
Where did you declare sign-in manager?
Sign-in manager was this inject line of code right here.
So I have that, and it's saying I can't use it before it's declared.
Okay, so Ryan asked earlier what happens when you try to go to a page and you're not logged in. And it does, the default is that it redirects to an account controller /login method. Right, so that's kind of the built-in default to ASP.NET. So, of course, we get to start by creating that controller. And so now that I've got this up and running, I'm going to close my layout. And let's go into my controllers and add a new controller, account controller. And we're going to add some new using statements using system threading tasks. So we'll be doing some asynchronous method calls. And so for that, start talking about, threading. Bring in identity and domain models. Bring in a user manager and a sign-in manager. Kind of going back here is our list, right? Manage users and manage roles. So we have a user manager, and a sign-in manager. And we'll build in a constructor. Oh, already did that for me. So what's coming ahead, right? We have to make. Well, we're gonna make a register user first, and so of course there's a view, of course there's a method in the controller, and there's a view model. So I'm just gonna follow the order that the book follows, which is to create a view model next. So under views, under models, view models.
Is there a reason we're doing the validation attributes in the view model and not in the user model? Oh, I guess because this is just for the register.
Just for the register page. Yeah, that makes sense. That's correct. Yeah. Vinny?
Do we want to default the properties to string empty or no?
It's not what the book has, so I'm just going to leave it off. So the register view model. So back in the account controller, the most boring action method you can have. Of course, that's on the get. Of course, there will be a little bit more there on the post. So they request the register page. And so let's code that view. We need a new folder. No, account, excuse me, account. Account folder, add a view called register. Is this why you were suggesting that non-nullable property equals
Yeah.
null? Just to make that happy. Sure, we'll get rid of the green squigglies. I changed my mind. How about it? Let's just see if we can hit the register page. See if we made any mistakes. Okay, so go into my view imports. Not domain models, but view models. There we go, there we go, there we go. Account register, account register.
Is it just me, or is this like the most interesting part of what we've done so far? Like, I think it is. That's not a diss on anything, I'm just saying.
No, I agree.
You know, I noticed on their homepage of this website, their like stat pick book is always changing with every refresh. And I was looking at how that was coded. And it's interesting. Like, keep clicking home, you'll see what that means.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of cool.
So on small devices and up, you get 2/12 for the label, 2/12 to the 12 columns for the label. You get 4 of the 12 columns for the text box, and you get the remaining 6 of the 12 for the span that'll give any errors for a username. So you kind of have a validation summary, and you have individual error messages on the controls. Now, copy and paste can really be utilized here if you got it right the first time. And paste it. The next field is the password, so we're going to change username to password. Password. And this is an input type of password. So I just had to add the type attribute because I did not have the type attribute on the username text box. Now, so be wary of my mistake, and this is actually 2 classes, form group and row, form group and row. So I had to fix that twice. Going down to confirm password, I'll copy the password div, paste it. And this label becomes confirm password, ASP4 confirm password. And then a submit button. Bless you. And another button to log. Sometimes you wind up on a register page. You're like, wait a minute, I'm going to try logging in first. Right? We've all been there, I imagine. Okay, that ends the register view. So just on glance, let's realize we don't have the post, so it's not going to register anything yet. Go to register. Of course, our labels could be better. Our labels could focus the controls, but that's okay. We've got 3 labels, 3 text boxes, and a register button.
Both are different.
But I like that she's protecting us rather
Isn't
than
that how we should do it?
yeah.
So I just unpaused, and it was during the paused moment that it was pointed out to me that the code that I was writing wasn't super close. I mean, it was very close, but it wasn't exact to what your textbook version has. And I glanced at the front of my textbook that I was following along with, and I had the old textbook. So like the labels are fixed in the new one, and other than that, there's probably very minor differences. Anyways, moving on, we are in the account controller, and we're going to make the post for the register. So let's do that. I'm now on the correct version 2. This is our first async method, which is nice because, as you guys know, database requests can take a while. So instead of just getting hung by a database request, it's taking a while to process. You kind of return the thread back to the calling method, and your code can continue to execute while the database lookup is going on. So kind of like getting 2 things at once. So we're going to write this async method that allows for a asynchronous database method call. We are going to return a task iActionResult. We're going to pass in a register view model. Check for valid data. If it is valid, instantiate a user. From the model. Create. So user manager, right, again, is our field up here. So we're calling a create async. So is persistent false, creates a non-persisting cookie, aka a session cookie. So if you close the browser, you log out. Of course, you could come in here and change it to persist if the user clicks a box to remember me. You can change that. So we create the user. If that user creation succeeds in the database, we sign in the user with an await method call, and after that we redirect to the home page. Otherwise, error messages abound. For each var error in result.errors. So otherwise, load up the model state full of errors and go back to the view and display those errors. Not all code paths, I'm sure.
Oh, I think the return view model at 51 needs to be outside of the if statement.
Ah, good eye. Thank you. Okay, let's see what breaks. And throwback to all the days, because I really got a little chuckle out of Joe Mama.
He had like 5 different yo mamas. Like,
Wait a minute. The big question of the day is Mama 2 M's or 1 M?
I think 1.
you.
There you go.
Unless you're really enunciating the mama.
Mama.
And my super secure password, because it didn't, what was the requirements? Like 6 characters?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
All A's. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Didn't we make it
1,
so that
2,
we
3,
had
4.
number in a thing too?
I didn't remember.
Uh,
Oh,
see, I was
capital A, 5 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Capital A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I think it would just be like require uppercase equals false if you wanted to get rid of that.
Joe Mama's logged in. Now, what I really want to see is how it's stored in here. There it is.
Not all code paths return copy. I forgot the long line.
Username.
Okay.
Password hash.
So I think it's nice to hash the password.
Sir?
Hash is a password for you. So that's what I was talking about. You don't even, like, remember we had to bring in bcrypt and hash our own passwords? Didn't have to do that,
Yeah.
you know?
That's because we were building that from scratch.
'Cause you're
This
building
is like
it
a
from
already regularized system.
Yeah.
We could have done something similar if we had just brought in like a NPM package, right?
Sure.
Most likely.
Sure.
You guys know if you make your password,
If I boot it back up though, I believe, yeah, we're logged out. Remember, because it's session cookies.
Remember that like Facebook scam where people were like, you type in your password, it puts it as all stars.
So are we gonna learn how to
Okay, so now we have register user working. Of course, next is login user. So let's just close all tabs. And we'll make a login view model.
Just skip there's a log out action method at the bottom of
Log out. Let's log out too. Good eye. And so we're back in the controller for the account. Pretty simple method. Now I don't have a login feature working, so I'm not going to make another account just to log out, but why not? We got the extra M on that one. And now, there we go, we logged out. To log back in, but. Okay. And we continue. Onto page 673, how to log in a user. Start with a view model. Add a class.
Oh yeah, I see that. The remember me button.
Yeah, it's coming. Yeah, no wonder why the green squiggly was there, and Vinny was asking me about that because we've been doing it all semester, and I said, no, don't worry about it, it's not in the book. I'm like, wait a minute, why is that a green squiggly? I don't remember that as a green squiggly. Okay, forget the book, let's just do it. And then
The anesthesia they gave you. Giving you.
the anesthesia.
You went back in time.
You've never had a filling before.
Thank God.
They put it on me. Yeah, I know.
What if you parse it from a string to a string and then add up two strings?
Okay, so if the user logs in successfully, that's where this property comes into play. You'll get redirected to this URL. And then if they click the box to remember me, you'll use a persistent cookie. So the user can close the browser and come back and still be logged in. Right, and that just all depends on the security of your website. If you're, a bank, you can't close the session and reopen it, right? They're going to make you re-log in. So high security sites need those session cookies, and whereas Facebook, they don't want you to log out. They want you to use their app forever. And so even if you close the browser, you still look like you're using Facebook, so their usage statistics can go up and they can sell them more marketing dollars. Not really, but that's what I think. Okay, moving on. Well, that's what they do, right? You ever, you scroll past a video on Facebook and it starts auto playing, and that's counting as like time of you watching it, even if you're just scrolling past.
Right.
You're not even watching it. They're getting all that usage statistics up to sell more marketing. Okay, the account login view. So where are we at? We're account. Let's add a view for logging in. And in the account controller, okay, so that is what we need for login. And obviously if we pass a parameter in, it'll overwrite the defaults of that empty string and it'll populate that property. And back into the view, we got a login view model. Okay, check that out. Okay, that's what I would expect. Account login. This is what we're more used to, right? Oops.
Mr. G,
Yeah,
on your second div in your class, you called it mole instead of a hole.
got it.
Mole.
Okay, let's start with the outer div, row MV2, label, form label, call medium2, call medium 4, call input for username, form control. How you doing, Mr. Reddick? Okay, if you got that,
Down to join your website.
if you've got that, he was, yeah, I know.
He
Mr. Reddick did not want to
wasn't
join our bookstore
He
website.
wasn't in a good mood.
He's like, I'm just here for vouchers. I don't want to join your bookstore website. Alright, that's the username. Let's do it again for password. Password, change it to password, change it to password, and the input needs to be type of password. Okay, after that we'll click on to remember me. The title's just like the tooltip. You hover the checkbox that says remember me. A little pop up over the cursor, if you will. Bless you. Okay, close the div, close the div. And two more divs, two more rows. If there was a bootstrap certification, I would think you guys would be bootstrap certified by the end of these 2 years. Okay, cancel, close the div, close the div. And then one more. All right, let's spin this up. I mean, the idea is, click on submit. I'm gonna put in, we need to have our posts. We don't have our post yet. So before I spin it up, let's do that. Actually, I just want to glance at the login page. Looks like a good login page to me. Lockout on failure false. So if you've ever dealt with user accounts before, you've probably dealt with being locked out.
Just lock them out immediately.
Yeah.
You get one try. So if there is a return URL and it's local, meaning not somehow fished into like some other website, then redirect to that local URL. Otherwise, go home. Otherwise, add an error, invalid username and password, send them back to the viewer. That return view has to be outside of the if statement.
Correct. That was a mistake I made last time. Sir.
So, I'm kind of confused on why are you using async now?
Because we're hitting a database. Where we weren't hitting.
Yeah.
Well, the methods that we're working with are all async methods, and the other ones aren't.
Oh yeah, like password sign in async. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
So we have to write async methods to work with these async methods. It's just built as an async method. All right. Fire it up. Log in. Log in. We're logged in. Log out. Log back in. Now, case insensitive, let's just experiment, right? Doesn't really seem to care. That's nice, because users aren't going to do that by default. And if I put in something bad, there we go.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you go to your login view model?
Yes.
I think I might have. Did you label? See, my passwords. It's not showing up the stars. It's like just showing my password straight up.
Oh, that's your type of.
Is that in the markup or is that?
That's in the markup. It's just a type of.
Type of password.
Type of password.
Gotcha.
Haven't really done anything with, because we're on the home page. When I log in, just takes us back to the home page. So we haven't done anything with that redirect URL yet. But we can now register users and log in users. You know, what's coming tomorrow is working with roles, restricting access, seeding roles. So we can, just like we can seed data, we can seed roles. Allow users to change their password. And then adding more registration fields. Of course, right now our registration is pretty blank, but we'll get into having first names and last names and emails and all that fun stuff. That's where I wanted to get today, so we'll stop here.